Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at the Post-COP28 Hong Kong Forum, co-organized by Business Environment Council, Civic Exchange, and HKUST Institute for the Environment and Division of Environment and Sustainability. I'm Prudence from BEC Policy and Research Team and your host today. To kickstart today's forum, may I invite Mr. Simon Ng, CEO of BEC, to give his opening remarks. Mr. Ng, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. 恭喜發財, and I wish you all a healthy and prosperous Chinese New Year. Today, I'm honored to open the Post-COP28 Hong Kong Forum, welcoming a dozen of distinguished speakers and over 100 participants at BEC. This forum has proven to be a very popular event over the years, and I'm so proud and happy to continue our long-term partnership with Civic Exchange, Hong Kong UST Institute for the Environment, and the Division of Environment and Sustainability as the event co-organizers. Now, in mid-November last year, less than 2 weeks before COP28 in Dubai, global average temperatures briefly hit the 2 degrees Celsius threshold above pre-industrial levels for the first time in modern recorded history. While it doesn't mean that we will definitely fail to achieve the target of holding global warming to well below 2 degrees by mid-century, it clearly shows how fast the planet is warming up and how quickly 1.5 degrees is getting out of reach. There is growing fear that we will breach the 1.5 degrees limit before the end of this decade. Now, this decade, not this century. It is predicted that greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 must fall by 42% in order to keep the 1.5 degrees pathway alive. Despite the increased urgency, the outcomes of COP28, according to myself at least, are far from satisfactory, to say the least. There are some gains, but compromised success at best. For example, the global stocktake call out fossil fuel that failed to deliberate a full phase-out plan. Progress has stalled in the mitigation work program, and there's little attention on adaptation, despite the global goal on adaptation was established. There are far too many discussions being pushed further down the road, and rather weak languages have been used in many occasions with limited determination to ensure implementation. I can continue with my frustration, even though I'm not a pessimist, but we gathered here today not to moan or to complain. Rather, the purpose of this post-COP Hong Kong Forum is to offer a platform for some of Hong Kong's COP28 participants to share their major observations and insights with the business community and other stakeholders. Actually, we had a rather sizable Hong Kong delegation to COP28 last year, which is a very positive sign. And you will hear from a distinct panel of speakers from different professional backgrounds to share their thoughts on topics related to the transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems, the finance mechanism that will facilitate such transition, and how we shall unite, act, and deliver together. I am confident our speakers today will inspire us into putting forward implementable transition plans and actions towards net zero. To our audience, I strongly encourage you to actively participate in the conversation and have a fruitful morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ng. Let's welcome Mr. Robert Gibson, Fellow of Civic Exchange, to the stage as he shares latest science and set the scene for the forum. Mr. Gibson, please.
Okay, greetings everyone. I've got 10 minutes. I'd love to have half an hour. So this is going to be going through things very quickly. A picture of the magnificent conference center where the COP was held. I'm running through talking about how climate is changing, the role of the FCCC. That's the organization for the COPs, the Paris Agreement, and the global stocktake. What attending it was like as an observer, and a little bit on the work that it actually outputs. We've showed this one before, which just emphasizes how drastic the position the world is in, the difference between the increase in carbon dioxide levels or greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere. In fact, this is just carbon dioxide since 1900 compared to the differences over the past 800,000 years, which took us into ice ages. You know, the difference we've got now is far greater than the difference between the peak of an ice age and an interglacial. And that's just carbon dioxide. If you add the other greenhouse gases, it becomes, you know, a factor of about 1.5 to 2 above. So it's a really big impact. And why aren't we seeing more impact yet? Well, 93% of the energy goes into the oceans, 3% into melting and ice. It takes a long time to warm the oceans, a long time to melt the ice caps. So we ain't seen nothing yet in terms of the impact of the carbon we've got in the atmosphere already. And just to point out, in terms of magnitude, that little green dot is the 12,000 years in which human civilization has moved from being cavemen. Why didn't civilization start earlier? Well, part of it was it kept getting knocked back by the ice ages. And another graph showing some of this, the one on the right with all these circles is one circle per year and 12 divisions per month. And you can see from 1940 through to current how the relative temperature has warmed. On the bottom left, you can see a graph which shows that, okay, we talk about the average for the world. Well, that's made up of the ocean, in this case, warming by 1.1, whilst the land warms by 1.8. You know, we're seeing more than the average if you're living on land. And what's driving this? You know, the Earth's energy, I mean, one of the scariest numbers I've got is the Earth's energy imbalance has doubled over the last 10 to 15 years. The difference in energy coming in from the sun compared to going out. So why has it increased so much? Part of it is the greenhouse gases. Another part of it is the fast feedback effect. As the Earth warms, so there's more water vapor in the atmosphere, and water vapor itself is a greenhouse gas, so that's a multiplier on the impact. And then Earth's surface is changing. We're getting less white or more dark. The Arctic ice has gone in the summer, so the Arctic is warming much faster than the rest of the planet. The wonderful work that's being done in reducing aerosols, reducing pollution, means that the planet is getting darker. IMO's switch from heavy fuel oil to marine diesel oil has had a significant impact, perhaps 0.2 degrees. We have, you know, it's still being worked out what that is. And of course, there are fluctuations in the warming as well as the trend, and the biggest one is the El Nino, where you have heat being moved between the ocean and the atmosphere, and we're currently in the period where it's moving from the ocean to the atmosphere, so that's why we've got a particular bump up last year. Plus Hunga Tunga. I always thought that volcanoes cooled the atmosphere. I mean, Pinatubo, when it went up, lots of aerosols in the upper atmosphere cooled it. Well, Hunga Tunga was an underwater or under ocean volcano, and it increased the water content of the atmosphere by about 10% for a period. And once again, water vapor is another greenhouse gas effectively, and so that warms us more. So, what's the consequence? Well, we know heat waves, floods, droughts, because the weather patterns change, and places which are used to rain don't get it, and vice versa, which disrupts agriculture and causes destruction. The jet stream becomes less stable as the temperature differential between the Arctic and the nearer the equator reduces, and that can lead it to it sort of curling down, and you get Arctic air coming into the US, you get hot air going upwards, all of which with poor consequences. So fires, dangerous to work outside, and guess what? We use more air conditioning, so we burn more coal. And there are longer term changes which I'm going to run through very quickly. I've showed this one, I think, last year. So the Arctic's warming about 4 times as fast. That's the dark at the top of the map. And that's where we've got loads of permafrost, which stores twice the carbon that's in the atmosphere. And that's starting to melt. And once again, it may not be sufficient to get to zero. We may have to go negative in order to offset the releases from permafrost. And this one I think I also showed last year, where you can see on the right the sea level is rising at an increasing rate. If you look at the 2001 to 71, it's 1.3 meters per year. 06 to 18, it's 3.7. It's accelerating as Antarctica moves from earlier Antarctica was taking on more water because the Earth warming meant more rainfall on Antarctica, so the snow builds up there. Now it's melting significantly. And there's quite a bit of talk about the ocean, I would call it heat conveyor. The currents so the one that coming from England, I know heard of very well, is the Gulf Stream. It moves the heat from the Caribbean towards England, making England much warmer than it would normally be. Now, what drives this ocean conveyor is the deep water formation, which happens both up here between sort of Greenland and Iceland, if you like, and down here near the Antarctic. And what's happening? Basically, you get ice forming. So when ice forms, it takes salty water, and the ice is salt-free pretty much. So the water that's left over is salty, is dense, and sinks. And it's that sinking that draws more water in, and you get the conveyor working. And as you get less ice formation or more fresh water coming off Greenland and off Antarctica, that is already slowing down. And if it flips, and it has flipped in the historical history, going back thousands of years, then the conveyor slows down, and England's suddenly going to find itself a lot cooler. So, what's the role of the UNFCCC in sorting this out? Well, founded in '92, it had failed attempts to get meaningful action at Kyoto in '97 and Copenhagen in '09. In 2015, with the Paris Agreement, it eventually got a deal which worked, and it's a deal which says every country, it's a bottom-up deal, every country declares their nationally determined contribution to decarbonising, to solving the problems, and the richer countries providing money, technical support, and capacity building to the poorer countries to help them decarbonise. And every it's a longer period initially, comes to here, 2003, but every 5 years in future, there will be a global stocktake where they compare the nationally determined contributions, what's been done with what's needed. And so they did that this year at Dubai, and then they've got 2 years, next year Azerbaijan, another oil-rich country, and then at Brazil, in the middle of the Amazon jungle, to come up with new nationally determined contributions to close the gap. So what is the gap? I mean, here you can see the progress since 1990 in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We haven't, we've increased them. Why is this? Well, technology's done well. We've got a 44% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per dollar at constant prices due to technology improvements. But we've got an 80% increase in per capita income, and we've got a 50% population growth. Put all those together, and the emissions have gone up by 51%. So our failure to reduce emissions means, as Simon was saying, we have big reductions required in order to stay on course. I personally think 1.5 is gone. There's no way we're going to keep to 1.5. And it's questionable whether we can keep to 2. There's a very good book that Simon Zadek's put out saying we should stop talking about 1.5, we should start talking about 4.5. Because if we talk about 4.5, you start thinking about the size of the migrant refugees, the refugees from climate change, places which are no longer habitable and they have to move. And you start thinking about shortages of food, and you start planning for that. One of the things he recommends is that cities should do vertical indoor farming, so they have more of their food. So, what was it like attending as an observer? Well, there's a 90-minute queue to get in with literally thousands of other people. These 4 pictures are all part of one queue. Once you get in, if you're an observer, you're divided into 9 different groups. Now, having started off as a company representative, I've got friends with the people in the business and industry groups. I go along to them, and they're good folk. This is on the bottom left, the morning meeting. So there's so much happening in so many different places at the COP that nobody knows everything that's happening. So you get together in the morning and, hey, what happened? Yeah, and different people have been to different meetings, and you sort of sort it out, and then what's important happening today. And the agenda that they go through, you can see here, this is all talking about a particular clause in the Paris Agreement and what to do about it here. So it gets into minutiae. I do not follow the negotiations at all when I go to the COP. What I do is the side events, because that's where the future is. But this is the negotiations. I mean, how do you get 196 countries to unanimously agree on anything? And you sort of start off with a table like that with loads of people sitting around it. And then you have the United Nations Secretary General, giving them the pep talk, smaller negotiation. And then this finally is the closing plenary, where they were on stage and they were saying, does anybody object? Or no, I hear no objections. Boom, it's agreed. And they had one thing then with the small island states. I'm sure it was stage managed, that they were not in the room when that happened. And then when they came in the room, they were given the first speaking slot to say, what they were unhappy with. So it ended up with being unanimously agreed, but them making their points. So besides the COP decision, which other people are going to talk about, what else does a COP do? Well, there were 9 different declarations which it worked on. And to give one example, because these declarations is where you get a group of countries who are willing to go more faster than you can get unanimous consent on. And it's a place where progress can really happen. So the Global Methane Pledge, which was started in Glasgow in 2021, and got more countries signing up, a lot more hoo-ha about this. So we've now got, I think it's 156 countries signing up to it, and what it is to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. And it's well doable. A lot of these come from oil and gas and for extraction, and also coal mines. And we can see what's happening now because we've got satellites. So if you take Poland, which you may, the blue are the people who've signed up, the grey haven't. And you take Poland, and the satellites tell you there's a real bad spot there for methane emissions. And you can get down to greater level of detail. So they've got loads of coal mines there which are leaking methane. China hasn't signed up, but it is very much part of the process. And I mean, one of the things with China is that it only signs up to things it sure can deliver. So it's working hard on this issue, but it hasn't actually signed the pledge yet. Hopefully it will soon. And here we had the session with the Hong Kong, CW Zhe, our Secretary for Environment and Ecology, telling all that wanted to listen about what COP's doing on what Hong Kong's doing on decarbonisation. So that's another side event. And I said there were declarations, and then there's side events. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds of side events. So that was the one where Hong Kong made its pitch. And here are 2 about the European Union carbon border adjustment. So on the right, you've got an event which is in the EU Pavilion, and you can go online and you can listen to it, and I strongly recommend it because it's quite interesting, the interaction. So you have both the Europeans there and a representative from Africa, and on the far right, you've got Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island in the USA, who was saying, this is the most wonderful thing. I've introduced a bill to do the same thing for the US. And if the US, the UK's already said it's going to be part of Europe as far as carbon border adjustment mechanism is concerned. If the US goes and does a policy which aligns to that, then it's starting to move the world in a direction. So what is CBAM? CBAM stands for Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Basically, what the EU is doing is it's saying, we are going to start applying our carbon price to people who make cement, steel, fertilizer, hydrogen within the EU. And at the same time as we do that, we're going to take a tariff when those goods are imported into the EU for the difference between the carbon price they paid where they originate and the carbon price in the EU. Because otherwise, when they tried putting a price on these goods, so cement, steel, before, without that, you just got loads of the cement coming in from Poland, as it then was, because it was before Poland joined the EU. So it just failed, and they had to give free credits to their cement and steel parent. So it's having an impact. And guess what? I hadn't seen these guys on the bottom left before, but here you've got the chief executive officers of ThistleCrop, can't remember the other 2 names, Eurogroup, and anyway. But basically, you've got the leading CEOs of leading German and Italian companies saying, this is how we're going to respond to it. You can make steel in a much lower carbon way if you use hydrogen rather than coking coal. So that's what I have to say, and I've taken 15 minutes, Simon, apologies. I shall hand over to the next person.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Please be seated. Our next guest, Dr. Li Fang, Country Director of WRI China, is not feeling well today, so she will not be able to join our forum. May I now invite our next guest, Mr. C.F. Wong, Commissioner for Climate Change, Hong Kong SAR, to share with us the key takeaways and achievements from COP28 at the city level. Mr. Wong, please.
Morning, Simon, Kelvin, Robert. I'm lucky to be given 15 minutes. I always love to listen to Robert for the kind of presentation you can consolidate and articulate the kind of data into simple but very forceful message. Yeah, thank you. COP was concluded in Dubai 3 months ago. It was attended by over 85,000 participants, including more than 150 heads of state and government. I understand that this was the biggest COP in the history. Apart from being the biggest COP, COP28 has a number of highlights. First of all, it marked the conclusion of the first global stocktake, as mentioned by Robert, about the world's collective effort in combating climate change under the Paris Agreement. It also marked the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. At the city level, it housed for the first time a local climate action summit. And this is housed within the high-level segment of the conference, which usually we have the meetings between the head of the state. I was most honored to be a part of the China delegation to attend this biggest conference, conference of party in history, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity today to share with you all some of the takeaway from this COP. I would also like to take the opportunity to discuss how we in Hong Kong could meet this latest global challenge. The first one will be the global stocktake. Global stocktake is a mechanism to assess and monitor the collective progress of all nations in achieving the ambitions under the Paris Agreement, which is to limit the average global temperature rise to within 1.5 degrees C. As Robert has mentioned, this is not optimistic. World Meteorological Organization confirmed that in 2023, it was the warmest year on record, with average global temperature reaching 1.45 degrees above pre-industrial level. As government and other stakeholders are gathered at COP28, the sense of urgency for ambitious climate action has never been so critical. The report of the first global stocktake released by the UN just before the COP28 underlines that despite overall progress on mitigation, adaptation, and implementation efforts, parties are not yet collectively on the track towards achieving the purpose of the Paris Agreement and its longer-term goals. It indicates that the window for limit warming to 1.5 degrees C is closing rapidly. It also recaps a need for achieving carbon neutrality by middle of this century, 2050, while acknowledging that the inclusive and just transition is needed, having regard to the specific circumstances of individual parties. It emphasized that to achieve global net zero, all sectors must take part in this low-carbon transition, including wider adoption of low-carbon energy, renewable energy, phasing out of reliance on fossil fuel without corresponding carbon capture technologies, and reducing emission of non-carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emissions. as well as promoting action on both supply and demand side. In Hong Kong, we have set a target to achieve carbon neutrality before 2050, with reference to the major emission source, including electricity generation, transport, and waste disposal. We have set out our strategies and action in moving towards carbon neutrality in our Climate Action Plan 2050. Many of you may know that. With the progress in various fronts, Hong Kong has reached her carbon peak in 2014, and by 2022, our per capita carbon emission has been reduced to 4.55 tons a year, a quarter below the peak value in 2014. Our latest per capita emission compares favorably with some of the cities like Singapore, New York, Washington, D.C., and Toronto in the developed world, and we are also on par with that of Tokyo. While we have progressive reduction in Hong Kong's carbon emission, we shall continue with our carbon neutrality ambition through strategic measures and partnership with every sector in the society, as advocated in the COP. The co-organizers of today's event have all played an important role in this Hong Kong's carbon neutrality pathway, from scientific research, business partnership, and policy advocacy. We would need your continuous support down the road. On the second item, beginning of the end, there were heated debate on the subject of energy transition at COP28. Although many of us may not be too satisfied about the agreement reached at the end, it signals the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era, involving acceleration of effort towards phasing down of unabated coal power and the transition away from fossil fuel in the energy system. Hong Kong has started her energy transition journey since 1997, when we stopped building the new coal-fired power plants. Since then, we have been switching progressively our fuel mix for electricity generation to include more zero-carbon electricity from nearby regions and replacing coal by LNG, liquefied natural gas. The share of coal in our fuel mix has been reducing from around half in 2015 to about a quarter these days. With this effort, Hong Kong has reached our carbon peak in 2014, as I just mentioned. Looking ahead, Hong Kong will cease the daily use of our remaining coal-fired power unit by 2035 and continue with our journey to achieve net zero electricity generation by 2050. For instance, we are expecting to see a further increase in our share of net zero electricity from the current 25% to around 35% by 2025, when the enhancement work of our current cross-border electricity transmission infrastructure could be completed. We have also reserved land in TKO area 132 for the planning of new power reception facilities to prepare for the increasing demand for net zero electricity. Apart from regional collaboration, we have also been exploring wider application of renewable and new energy in Hong Kong. In the first half of this year, we will be seeing the promulgation of Hong Kong's strategy for hydrogen development, which will be to facilitate the development of local application of hydrogen energy and the introduction of legislative control on the safe manufacture, storage, and use of hydrogen in the city. We are also in the planning of a major floating solar power project on one of the major reservoirs in Hong Kong. On cities' participation, COP28 saw for the first time cities' formal participation and contribution in this global agenda. As part of the high-level event in the first few days of the 2-week-long conference, the local Climate Action Summit was organized for participation by city administrators. Being a steering committee member of the C40 City Climate Network, Hong Kong was invited to take part in this summit. We took the opportunity to share Hong Kong's decarbonization ambition, target, strategies, and action. We were congratulated for the comprehensive strategy, structured action progress made so far. Moreover, the summit has fostered collaboration among cities worldwide, allowing us to exchange good practices and experience in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We have a lot of bilateral meetings around the event, and hopefully this will pave the way for future collaboration among different cities around the world. The need for huge amount of finance to take forward the global climate ambition was again recognized in the COP. The ambition of Hong Kong in developing into a regional green finance hub was put forward in various occasions in the conference. The Hong Kong Financial Development Council, in collaboration with the Friends of the Earth, has staged a side event at the China Pavilion, as just mentioned by Robert, to engage with international participants in the discussion of various challenges in this area. In the next 15 to 20 years, it's estimated that the Hong Kong government's expenditure on mitigation and adaptation will reach 240 billion. We expect that the private sector will also invest heavily in managing their climate risk. On the subject of climate risk, I have in various occasions trying to impress upon the business is more than an environmental responsibility. It's a business challenge. We hope that all of you will find the solution in managing the climate risk in the near future. Climate adaptation is also a part of this the discussion in the COP. The escalation of global warming has resulted in more frequent extreme weather events. Such impact is tangibly felt in Hong Kong in COP28. Party also agreed on the targets for the Global Goal on Adaptation, GGA, which identify where the world needs to get to in order to be resilient to the impact of climate change, and also a framework to assess the country's effort in this regard. The GGA framework reflects a global consensus on adaptation targets and the need for finance, technology, as well as capacity building support to achieve them. While Hong Kong has a very strong foundation in climate adaptation, it's imperative for us to improve the capacity of government infrastructure in combating climate change and extreme weather. Many of you may already know that the government has established a climate change working group on infrastructure to coordinate the effort of Works Department in adapting to climate change. It has identified the scope for enhancing work necessary for about 350 critical infrastructures, covering coastal infrastructures, drainage and sewage, water supply, transport, and government building. The working group also updates from time to time the design manual for port works, stormwater drainage, and road pavements. With reference to the latest assessment report published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. As the impact of global warming is becoming more apparent, we must also scale up our capacity in coping with extreme weather events. The government will adopt a more preemptive and strategic approach to cope with extreme weather. We will explore the use of big data, artificial intelligence, and other technologies to improve our risk assessment capability in relation with meteorological forecasts, as well as flooding and landslide hazard assessment. To conclude, confronting climate change is an extremely challenging task, both globally and locally. To this end, we need regional collaboration to move forward in the net zero energy transition. We need also regional and global collaboration in the development of innovative solutions, science, and the green finance, more importantly, a green finance framework for the diversion of adequate resources to this low-carbon transition. Locally, we need the support of the community, including research institutes, to spend more effort in the development of cost-effective and locally applicable green technologies to bridge the solution gap for carbon neutrality. We need also the think tank to look into practical policy measures for local adoption to drive for more proactive climate action in the community, and the business sector to take part and contribute in Hong Kong's very challenging carbon neutrality pathway. Ladies and gentlemen, COP28 is just another move in the group's necessary journey to carbon neutrality. I hope that no matter whether you have personally participated in the conference, you will find some useful insights from today's event on your own journey in the climate change era. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Please be seated. Now let's move on to the panel discussion, transitioning away from fossil fuels, interpreting the call for action in a meaningful way. May I invite to the stage our moderator, Mr. Merlin Lau, Head of Policy and Research of BEC, and our panelists, Mr. Ivo Spierenberg, Deputy Director, Corporate Strategy of CLP Power Hong Kong, Professor Alfred Seet, Chief Executive and Secretary of the Hong Kong Institution of Engineers, and Mr. Mark Chen, Executive Lead and CEO of New Wong Operations Limited. Merlin, over to you, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Actually, I haven't been to COP28. Maybe Ivo, have you been? No. So myself, I have been to COP23, and then not the rest. And as we have the largest yeah. So I think it's 100,000 capacity, right? So there's a lot happening, like Robert mentioned, like CF mentioned. Today we bring in a group of experts. Actually, as you heard, we have Professor Alfred Seet, currently like Chief Executive and also the Secretary of the Hong Kong Institute of Engineers. And I'm sure you know him better in his public sector capacity as well. And Ivo, we bring in him. Of course, he supports long-term Hong Kong energy transition of the electricity sector with CLP. And also Mark, he is a seasonal expert in IT and digital field. And right now he's with a startup in HKSTP. And I know Alfred and also Mark has also been to the COP28. Maybe to really start with, do you want to say a few words about yourself? Or I already introduced you enough? Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thought with all such important audience, and we work together in combating climate change. That's a really important issue for the whole mankind. I attended the COP28, and well, let me introduce myself. I'm now working as the Chief Executive and Secretary at the Hong Kong Institution of Engineers. I also serve at a number of universities. For example, I'm a senior advisor to the President of British University and a professor at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University as well. So before my retirement from the government, I have worked in the government for more than 30 years as a civil servant. Most of the time I worked in Electrical and Mechanical Service Department. One of the duties of the department is to look after the promotion of energy efficiency and conservation, as well as renewable energy in Hong Kong. We draft legislation, we promoting public education and promotion, as well as developing some new infrastructure, such as district cooling system. After 30 years as a civil servant, I changed my path and invited to serve as a political appointee, as a Secretary for Innovation and Technology for a few years. I served at the steering committee. There's a steering committee led by the Chief Executive in the government in combating climate change. I was a member of the steering committee. So CF just mentioned about the working group and all sorts of committee. They are all under the same committee. We give them this directive on which area that we should work on and we should put focus on. In the international arena, I serve as a member of the Energy Working Group at the APEC, and so there's altogether, well, more than 20 different economies in the APEC to work together in promoting energy conservation, renewable energy, and well, that's my background. So anyway, thank you again for the opportunity, and look forward to a very fruitful discussion with the audience and our partners in the panel. Thank you.
Maybe Ivo?
Morning. First of all, I'm honored to be on this panel with some very distinguished panelists, and I hope that some of the things I share with you this morning are interesting. A quick background on me: I am a chartered electrical engineer. I studied power systems engineering and economics some time ago. I have over 20 years experience in the energy industry, working across 3 different continents, actually. And very early in my career, one of the first things I worked on as an electrical engineer was a connection of an offshore wind farm, a very early one, to the transmission network in the UK. And so that was one of the first challenges I had to work on. And since then, I've been really passionate about helping to solve the decarbonization challenge that we have. Eventually, through a meandering path in my career, I've ended up specializing in policy, economic regulation, and strategy. So I spend most of my time now thinking about that. I've been in Hong Kong for 3 years. It's been an amazing 3 years, the entry into the city and 3 weeks quarantine aside. My family and I have made some amazing memories, and we really love it. I've been working in CLP Power during that time, and I've done 3 things. We've been working on agreeing the development plan for the organization for the 2024 to 2028 period. That's all the investments that we will be making, part of which help to achieve the decarbonization goals. We've done an interim review of the Scheme of Control Agreement, which is the regulatory contract that governs how that works in the city. And I've implemented a new long-term strategic planning process. So that's all been very interesting. Thoughts on COP28? I agree with all the other speakers. The action now is critical. Some points for me that really hit home: seeing a waterfall inside Wong Tai Sin Station was quite shocking. And I have a 9-year-old daughter, and whenever we watch any documentaries on climate change, she literally goes into tears and becomes really distraught. And so that's quite a strong emotional connection for me, and I really feel the urgency to do something. And even the COP28 outcome recognized accelerating action in this critical decade. So the words were right. We just need the actions to follow. And finally, I'm optimistic on the possibility still. I'm with Simon, I'm an optimist. But it's critical to keep people on board. We need action, but it needs to be sustained action. And they recognize that as well in the COP statement by saying we need to transition in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. And I think what that means here, what that means for us, is we need to balance the energy trilemma from an energy perspective to minimize the cost of a reliable and sustainable system. Thanks.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Chen. So I'm also an engineer in nature. I'm a chartered engineer, and I spent around 15 years in Europe as an engineer. And actually, Neuron, you can see, actually, I'm working on Neuron Digital. Neuron Digital is a spin-off from Arab. We are not a consultant. We are more providing the technology and solutions that is practical and scalable, that we can help the industry to do the digitization and decarbonization much faster and especially on affordable way. So this is our mission, to set up this subsidiary from Arab, and we want to convert a lot of domain knowledge from all of you and from our customer, and also especially from Arab, into a solution, into a practical solutions that we can actually implement it. And especially thank you for a lot of customer now, EMSD and CLP, provide us the opportunity to do the test bed in the past few years. And I also joined the COP28, but I'm not able to get into all the conference. We have a very small pavilions outside. Thank you for the Hong Kong government and Science Park to provide the opportunity. I can see there's, from technology side, there's a lot of technology emerging that potentially we can help on the building and efficiency improvement. But if you are talking about the hard target on 2030 for a lot of building to become net zero, especially on the operation carbon, we are talking about around 20% of reduction of energy consumption based on the current baseline. I think from technology side, this is not something impossible, but it's just a matter of how far and how quickly we adopt the solution. On some of the building, if people you reckon 2 years ago, Neuron and the Arab team proposed a concept for the living lab for the existing building, how you transit from existing building to become net zero. Technology pathway is there, but actually we can only apply to very limited buildings in Hong Kong potentially. But Hong Kong we have 50,000 buildings, so how we can apply the technology in a more scalable way is the mission from our company. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good introduction, and as we go into the panel discussion, you can share more thoughts in COP28 that you see. So our panel is about transition away from fossil fuel, interpreting the call for action in a meaningful way. Basically, I think there are three numbers that we can capture, right? So the global targets of trying to tripling renewable energy generation capacity by 2030, and as well doubling energy efficiency improvement by also 2030. And also, I think IEA, the International Energy Agency, has called for a 25% reduction in fossil fuel demand in its latest net zero scenario. So, and as we heard, right, it's the first time due to political negotiation, we use the term transitioning away from fossil fuel. So it's the first time we talk about this. I think in our panel, we will try to touch upon some of this energy supply and also the usage demand aspect. To start with, maybe back to Ivo. Now you are with CLP Power. As mentioned, the government outline is net zero electricity generation in the Climate Action Plan 2050, right? So with the international call on scaling up the renewable energy, how do you see, I mean, overall, like now you are in Hong Kong for 3 years, I assume you see enough yet. You can share with us the near term, mid-term, and long term in terms of this energy transition. Yeah.
Thanks, Merlin. So yeah, as CF very clearly articulated earlier, the Climate Action Plan 2050 does set a clear trajectory towards achieving carbon neutrality. And when I look at the COP28 outcomes, I think what we're aiming to achieve here in Hong Kong is fully consistent with that. And also, as CF pointed out, the focus of the Climate Action Plan is on decarbonizing electricity generation, transport, and waste. And electricity generation and transport combined account for over 80% of emissions in Hong Kong. So if we tackle those two, and they are interrelated, we'll have taken a big chunk out of the problem. Although it is worth noting that the Climate Action Plan doesn't consider shipping, aviation, or Scope 3 emissions. And so I think that is something else to consider, but I won't focus on those three aspects today. But I will quickly touch on the targets, but CF already articulated those, so I won't spend a great deal of time. What is the plan to achieve those targets in the Climate Action Plan? We'll touch on the role of renewables in that, and what does that actually mean? So target-wise, we're looking to scale up the amount of net zero or zero carbon generation in the fuel mix to 60 to 70% of electricity supplied by 2035, and to reach net zero generation by 2050. And we're looking to phase out coal by 2035. And finally, we're looking to increase the proportion of renewable energy in that mix. And the renewable energy will help to decarbonize, but it has its own target as well. And we're looking to increase that to between 7.5 to 10% by 2035 and up to 15% thereafter. You can imagine that there's some challenges within that, and so we'll go through that. The starting point, which CF pointed out, is in 2014, when emissions peaked in Hong Kong, we had about 50% of our electricity was coming from coal. Around 25% of that was being imported from the nuclear power station in Daya Bay. And what that meant was that the carbon intensity of the system at that time was about 0.6 kilograms per kilowatt hour supplied. So that's the kind of starting point in the 2015 time. So what's the plan to get to the targets? And it's a three-phased approach. And taking a three-phased approach allows us to balance the energy trilemma, which I mentioned earlier, keeping people on board with this so we can sustain the change. And it also helps us to navigate some uncertainty that we face in what is the best way to achieve that balance. And so the three phases are in the decades, essentially. So over the course of the 2020s, we're looking to phase down the use of coal through introducing more gas-fired generation into the system. CF mentioned that already. You might wonder, why are we replacing one fossil fuel with another fossil fuel? Does that even make sense? Well, gas has about 40% of the carbon intensity of coal, and it's readily available. So we're looking to get those carbon emissions down as quickly as possible with that existing technology. So from there, over the 2030s, we're looking to phase down gas with more renewable energy as a key zero carbon source, but also likely more nuclear energy, which is another zero carbon source that is a technology that is mature over that period. And those technologies, though, are evolving quite rapidly. And so the pace at which we deploy those, we're trying to optimize that. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. And then over the course of the 2040s, we'll have quite a considerable amount of zero carbon energy and gas. And then we'll need to then phase down that gas using zero carbon fuels like green hydrogen, potentially. The reason we need that is we still need to maintain some flexibility in the system in order to be able to operate it. Those are the three phases that we're working towards. That final phase there, the green hydrogen, I would say is highly uncertain whether that is going to be sufficiently economic to deploy in the system, and that's why that's in the final phase of the plan. So what does it mean? If we do these things, it means that from a starting carbon intensity of 0.6 kilograms per kilowatt hour, by 2035 we should get down to around 0.1 by 2035. So that'll be quite a significant reduction in approximately the next decade, and then obviously that will take us down to zero by 2050 if we do that final step. What the other implication of that is we will have a very low carbon energy source, which we can then use to decarbonize transport. And of course, that's also a key part of the climate action plan, is to electrify much of transport and use that resource that we're building up in a zero carbon electricity system. And then finally, in terms of the decarbonization plan, I think we need to provide people with the tools to manage their energy consumption and to optimize when they consume their energy. Because when we have more renewables, which generate when the wind and sun is around, when we have more nuclear energy as well, which is quite steady and doesn't really want to move around in terms of a technology, then operating the system becomes more challenging. And electricity is one of these industries that's relatively unique, where demand doesn't really respond to the cost of supply. So what does this mean? It means we need to reduce our consumption through energy efficiency, which we'll be talking about in a moment. It means we need to shift consumption away from peak times, if we can, to reduce the size and cost of the overall system. And CLP is already doing this by, last year, for example, we, through various programs, shifted around 190 megawatts away from peak times. So that's reducing the total size of the system. And the final thing that we're doing there is we're investing in smart meters. Both Hong Kong Electric and CLP are investing in a smart meter program. And this, for CLP, is due to finish in 2026, so very soon. And that's a key tool to allow that demand flexibility to show people what they're consuming so they can be more efficient, and to allow us to have demand that's a bit more flexible to the types of supply that we have.
Very quick pick up on this. You mentioned, right, green hydrogen in the long run, and we touch upon the global target. Okay, let's try to triple the renewable energy capacity. And you mentioned there's already a target in Hong Kong. And how do you see, I mean, the overall renewable energy deployment, and how do you see in the next 10, 20 years on this?
Sure, I'll do as briefly as I can. Our renewable energy currently supplies about 1% of electricity consumption, so it's pretty small. The target for 2035, as I said, is to get up to 7.5 to 10%. So it's quite a big jump, but there are there are constraints in Hong Kong. There's space constraints, and I think largely it also comes down to the economics and making sure that we do minimize the cost of the transition in a reliable way. So what are the options? Solar PV is one option. Wind energy, offshore wind in particular, I think is another one, and waste to energy is a third one. And the Climate Action Plan sets out targets and indications in terms of ranges for where we might get to with these technologies. But we'll never get to the total amount locally. And as CF said, it's really important that we collaborate regionally. I mean, collaboration is another key aspect of getting to 2050. And so we'll need to do that to make it work. But to give you a sense of the economics, CLP's current tariff is, on average, is $1.49 per kilowatt hour. And that is a reasonable approximation of the cost of the overall system at the moment. For solar PV, we have a feed-in tariff that promotes the rollout of solar PV. The feed-in tariff is, depending on the size of the unit, between $2.50 and $4 per kilowatt hour. So a fair bit more expensive than the cost of the overall system at the moment. So that's one of the challenges with solar PV. With offshore wind, both Hong Kong Electric and CLP are developing local projects. The space in the sea is limited that we can use because of marine traffic and other restrictions. So we do have some sites that we're developing, but we want to make the most of those limited sites. And the technology for offshore wind is evolving very rapidly. Turbines are getting much bigger, much more efficient. We can do more in a smaller space. And we want to make sure that we reach those targets in time, but that we do it in the most optimal way that we can. And I'll come back to my previous point, which is that regional collaboration. We're going to have to work with the rest of China. They also have a challenge of decarbonizing, but we're going to have to work with them to try and get some of their resources and import them for use here.
Thank you. Thank you for very, I think, short time, and you give a comprehensive overview. And I think that really brings to Professor Alfred, like, with your extensive experience in, of course, a former secretary, and as well as a long-lasting experience in EMSD. How do you see the Hong Kong, bigger picture for Hong Kong on this successful transition to a low-carbon future?
I think when we planning our strategy in combating climate change through energy utilization, we need to look at both supply and demand side. Ivo has mentioned a lot about how we can make better use of energy supply with a lower carbon or zero carbon in supporting our economic development. Let me move to energy efficiency and conservation. That is the demand side. We should be pleased to look that Hong Kong is one of the few economies who start the journey early in energy conservation and energy efficiency and conservation. As early as 1990, we set up the Energy Efficiency Office in the Electrical and Mechanical Service Department with the responsibility looking after our journey in promoting energy efficiency and conservation, as well as renewable energy. We did it in a few different ways. One, as what I just mentioned, is about public education and promotion. And we also plan and implement a few very important legislation. One is the energy efficiency labeling, to give the information to our public about how the electrical appliances perform in the energy performance. And the second very important legislation, that is the building energy efficiency audience. I remember, well, I dropped all the legislation at that time. I remember very clearly at that time there was strong debate. Why? Why the government need to have legislation to require the people to do something that is not so important at that moment. We control the energy performance of all major energy consuming installation in office buildings. That is a lot of strong debate. Eventually, we won the battle and convinced the people to support, to the new legislation. The reason behind is very well. But the argument at that time, I remember, was that if the energy efficiency can have some economic sense, can reduce the energy consumption and reduce the electricity bill, let the business people to do it by themselves. While they have all the incentive, financial incentive to reduce the electricity bill through better energy efficient installations at their buildings. Why the government bother to have such legislation to enforce, to require the people to use and buy some more expensive energy efficient product? The reason is very simple for me, because of speed incentive. For those who buy and install the installations, who consume electricity, they may not be the people who pay the bill. That's the reason why the government need to step in. Because of all this good foundation, I think in the past 20, 30 years, Hong Kong performed quite good in our energy efficiency and conservation journey. Allow me to give you some example. We've turned 2005 as the base year. We have already reduced our energy intensity by 30.8% at the year of 2020. So that is quite a good performance. But I have to say, that is not good enough. Sorry, CF. That is not good enough at all. We are talking about energy intensity, not the actual energy consumption. That's the point. We need to put a bigger effort in both supply and demand side before we can really win the journey, win the battle. How can we do it? Allow me to offer some, suggestions, I would say. One, better use of technology. So Mark will tell you more. How can technology help in the journey? The second, my suggestion is on regional cooperation. I totally agree with Ivo. The journey in combating climate change is not only on technical issues, it's also on economic side. Hong Kong is small, congested, the land, we are net of land. So we are talking about in promoting renewable energy, well, it may cause a sharp rise in our energy electricity bill. We have already faced such a situation. How can we make use of better regional cooperation so that we can reduce our costs in energy production? We need to think hard and promote hard to make it happen. As a matter of fact, it is not, that's not something new. Starting from 1990, we have the Daya Bay nuclear power plant to supply 25% of our electricity. Why don't we make use of better regional cooperation, I mean the GBA cooperation, Greater Bay Area, so that we can enjoy a cleaner, greener, and more cost-effective energy production? That's my suggestion. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Alfred, you mentioned, I think you already mentioned, because I wanted to ask, we have our strength, but what are the areas that we need to catch? Do you want to add that?
Well, for example, I may upset Ivo or some people in the room. So we are talking about have our own wind farm in Hong Kong. So that is a good idea. So, we can have our own renewable energy source. But Ivo, you may supplement. For those installation wind farm, it will cost a lot to Hong Kong people. In the nearby area, the Greater Bay Area, mainland city, they have much more resourceful in land, in manpower supply, all sorts of ingredients required for more cost-effective renewable energy production. Can we have more cooperation with our labor so that Hong Kong, we can offer some financial support to make something important happen, and at the same time, we enjoy some return with a better, cleaner, greener, and more cost-effective energy supply. That's my point.
Quickly respond.
Yeah, I'm a very hard man to upset, so no problem there. Mainland China has been the biggest and fastest growing renewable energy market for like a decade, right? They're going to exceed 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy in the very near future. So it's huge, but the system there is about 3,000 megawatts, and 70% of energy is still supplied using fossil fuels. So China themselves, the rest of China, has a huge challenge to overcome. And so we'll need to work together to share those resources. And it's possible that, and I'm from CLP, I would say this, we can develop local RE, although it'll be in a limited fashion. And as I said earlier, we just need to make sure that we do it at the right time to optimize the cost. I totally agree.
Thank you. Mark, long experience in building sector, and we know like building accounts for 90% of the electricity and thus the carbon emissions. So tell us about your work, innovation.
Yeah, I think the one, there are actually two sides. Traditionally, we are very focusing on the demand side, applying the technology to help building to save the energy. So that's one thing. As you mentioned, we accounts for 90% of the electricity. But on the other side, we also see technology applying in the supply side, in terms of the renewable energy. For example, specifically solar panel, wind farm, as well as the storage system. Apart from the physical installation on the wind farm and solar panel, there are emerging technology in this field, how we can optimize the production on this renewable energy. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, we don't have a wind farm in Hong Kong, so therefore we are not able to test our technology. But we do have some pilot case overseas to test the digital twins for the wind farm. But in Hong Kong, renewable energy mostly apply for the solar panel, and we are testing with the government in terms of how we can optimize the production of the PV panel production. And you can see it's very interestingly, it is not just a physical installation and then you get the energy. It's actually fluctuating quite significantly. The majority factor is the sun radiation, but at the same time, also subject to your maintenance level, your installation angles, and as well as the local atmosphere. So these are traditionally not able to quantify or analyze based on a human judgment. So a lot of installation is just on a very layman fashion to install the solar panel, but we are not able to optimize the usage. So, as you already know, the solar panel only accounts for very limited percentage in Hong Kong. So we should be better to make good use of it by analyzing how we can optimize the performance. So this is something we are currently working on. I think in terms of the demand side, I believe Alfred later on can further supplement a lot of technologies that we can apply here. Yeah.
So Mark, you mentioned you try your cases overseas, right? So how do you see some of these technologies that you can use in Hong Kong in future? Because you are also in Science Park, right?
Yeah, I think as Alfred mentioned, I think Hong Kong is a very pioneer in this green energy. And when we are going to Dubai, we are going to the Southeast Asia, they always take reference to Hong Kong, not just on the technology side, but very luckily we have a lot of policies proposed by the government. So therefore, in many countries, if they don't have a policy, they will reference to Hong Kong. So this actually helps the local industry to go outside. When we are going to next week, we are going to Saudi with the Hong Kong government. And in those areas, there's actually lack of a very good in place, for example, building retro commissioning standard. So they are really looking into all these good reference. So if Hong Kong, we can be more aggressively proposing this policy. It's not just helping our city to achieve net zero, but it actually really help our solution providers like us to go outside. Yeah.
Well, going back to the COP28 experience, I was there. To be honest, I'm not so impressed by the agreement. I'm not so impressed by the exhibition given by those countries or cities. I was deeply impressed by the company, the startup, tech startup. They show the technology in combating climate change. Mark is one of the companies representing Hong Kong to join the exhibition. Thank you for CF's support and the Hong Kong Science Technology Park support. We have a few companies from Hong Kong showcase the climate change technology, the new technology that can effectively combat climate change. They work really well. They work really well. The point here is that how can we promote more the application of technology worldwide, starting from Hong Kong? How can we do it? That is the key problem. I think BEC should have a special role because while BEC should be the one who network the whole business community in combating climate change, and tech startup need your support. Of course, government should, lead by example to make use of more technology, new technology in the government building and premises. But again, it depends on the support of the local community, business communities, so that the tech startup can survive in the journey, and so they can offer better contributions in the battle against climate change. That's very important. We have the potential, but how can we make good use of those nice and great tech startups in Hong Kong to help our journey, help our battle against climate change? That's the question that we should answer by ourselves in this room.
Thank you. So we have QR code. I know someone already put up questions. Some of them are quite interesting. However, does anyone want to ask the question on site? Raise your hand. 2. Okay, let's 3. 1 question. And can we pass the mic?
Because you said 1 question, I'll make it brief. You mentioned, about, solar panel. I think we are really not looking at the solar panel efficiency in the right way. We are looking at generating power. But what solar panel really does is it shade off the buildings, shade off the places that actually cuts down all the heat. If you could put that together, that the number could be different. And Alfred, you mentioned you're pushing a lot of policies and trying new things. But I mentioned to CF, we need our government, between governments, departments, to tak chang song bong, okay? Make things simple, make it work, The solar panel is a good example. KS Wong make a legislation that to put out solar panel car park covers in the city. And we are still fighting on an interpretation between buildings department that it should be non-domestic use. What does that mean is, in my interpretation is, well, I should not put a car park and someone live in there. But because of non-domestic use, this wording, now all the residential buildings cannot put a car park with a solar panel on. So this is something that I brought to you, and this afternoon we're gonna have a carbon neutrality meeting. I'll definitely bring it up again. Hopefully, the government departments, we resolve this, and really breaking down the barriers. Alfred, you talk about allowing high tech to work. We need to get the government departments to work like China, our motherland. Let's just let them try. But instead we put all the regulations on top of them. Our fire service, every department stopping all the new tax to try. So how can we expand? Thank you.
As a comment.
Well, CF should be in a better position to answer the comment. But as an ex-government official, I have to say the government has already tried their very best to promote new technology. And they did, and they do lead by example. I give an example. Well, one of the policies we implemented at my time as the Secretary for Innovation and Technology. We changed the marking system for our contracts, for our government contracts. Some people always complain we go for the lowest price. That is not the case now. Usually, most of the tender, we use two envelope system. One is on financial, and the second is on technical. In my time, we changed the marking system for technical, and now should be I forget the exact figure. Should be about 20% of the technical mark given to innovative product. Given to innovative product. So it means that for those companies, they use new technology in their offer to the government. They should be able to get 20 marks more for their services or installations. That is the way where we promote the application of new technology in the government contracts. But Daniel has already pointed out there's a number of legislation that's usually, well, I have to admit, for all legislation and for all sorts of government requirements, why they appear? Because the community cannot guarantee the safety by themselves. So the government step in to make use of legislation and some sorts of government requirement to control the safety performance. That's the reason for us to have all such legislation to support our community operating smoothly. So it means the legislation nowadays only cover current or old problems. They are not for the future. They are not for the future. So most of the legislation, they have an escape route. They allow the senior official, including the secretary or the department head, to have the discretionary power to forget about the legislation, forget about the statutory control for a while, to promote the application of new ideas and technologies. The question here is that how the community support the senior government official to make use of their discretionary power to facilitate the application of innovative and new technology in Hong Kong. We need the support of the whole community. BEC, again, all the fans in the room, please, when the government do something new, they may not follow exactly the existing government rules and regulations. Please give them support. Don't always, you senior government official must have something behind the scene so that you don't follow the rules and regulations. Give them support. That's very important. We have already built in some flexibility in the legislation, but how we promote the senior government officials to make use of such flexibility to make our community moving faster and in a better way. That's the reason. That's the main point. That's my feeling as an ex-government official. Okay. You may not agree with me, but anyway, that's my, true belief. Thank you.
Okay, so we need to drive our senior official, and when they become more flexible, we need to support their ideas as well. Yes. I know some hands, but I want to ask two questions first here. Particularly, I think for people, is we mentioned regional collaboration, right? So how do we ensure that we get cost-effective clean energy via collaboration. Of course, there are some argument from news media when we purchase water, importing. So in a sense, like from your perspective, in order to secure clean energy, stability, and balancing this cost effectiveness, what is your strategy? And I want to add on that question, maybe combined together. Some ask like, okay, now we have more carbon pricing. So do we see carbon pricing have a driving change in the use of fossil fuels so that you may switch to some other alternative fuels? I just combine these two questions together to save time. Can you try?
Thanks, Merlin. So on the first one, how do we ensure that we have cost-effective decarbonization solutions? I think was the gist of the question. I think it boils down to having multiple parties exploring multiple options and keeping a pipeline of options open and committing to those options when it's clear that they are, as clear as it can be, that they are going to be the best solutions for meeting the decarbonization need. And then on the second one, which is carbon pricing and carbon markets, you'll not be surprised that CLP is looking closely at carbon markets. The CLP group, not CLP Power Hong Kong, has a number of renewable energy projects in the rest of China, and so carbon markets and green energy certificates, two slightly different things, but they are important, and those are financial tools that will help us achieve decarbonization. I think carbon markets and carbon pricing in Hong Kong, alongside the scheme of control, I don't think that those two necessarily fit well together. The scheme of control already allows for the price of decarbonizing to be recovered through electricity tariffs. Of course, we need to do that in the right way to manage the impact on tariffs. But adding a carbon price in Hong Kong and applying that to existing electricity generation will not help to move that forward in any way.
Okay, take one more question. Let me ask one more question here first. So we have this new development areas, right? Northern Metropolis and some other areas. And we mentioned some of the technology like shifting energy use, peak time, battery storage. So how do you see what kind of, let's say, innovation we can use in these new development areas? And anyone can try to address this? Like in terms of renewable energy, like stabilizing grid or like energy efficiency? Or anyone can try?
Well, in my work as a professor at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, I'm working on a microgrid system at the Loop area. For this microgrid system, is quite a new idea. Well, it's not a really new idea. It's something new in Hong Kong, so that we can make use of microgrid to better coordinate all sorts of energy supply and demand sources in the small region. For example, we have a PV panel, we have a small wind turbine, we have an energy supply from the electricity vehicle during emergency because of all the batteries at the EV. If we can change the system a little bit, they can be the supply of electricity during emergency or during some time while we need to reduce the energy demand from the grid. That is some sort of new development, I think, that we can try and make good use at the new development area. Certainly, for example, other current infrastructure development like the district cooling system, we should make good use of them to reduce our energy utilization in the new DA. That's my thing. That's my thought.
Mark, do you want to add on?
Yeah, I think for the new development area, the majority of the building, they need to consider not just the operation one, the operation carbon, but they also need to consider the embodied carbon and also the construction carbon. Because I think we're almost talking about 2030, all this building is completed after that. So we are entering into a new area of how we do the building life cycle carbon monitoring. And we actually talked to quite a number of, including government department and public sector customer, and we do see that there's a need in Hong Kong to set up this framework, how to design and implement this solution in a more systematic way. Because going into detail, what is the carbon factor for individual material? We don't have a database and we don't have a standard yet. A lot of customers, they are referring to overseas standard. And for internally for Arab, we do have a database, but we are having the trouble to maintain this database in a more efficient way. So I think this needs to have a industrial collaboration on setting up this building life cycle carbon management.
Okay, we have two hands, and I think Robert also a question, right? Can we ask all the questions together so that we can answer? Maybe Priscilla.
Hi, this is Priscilla from Tsunami Electric. Thank you for mentioning the microgrid. We are ready to, innovating with Hong Kong. But my question for you will be on energy efficiency. How do you think about retrofitting in the buildings in Hong Kong? Because this is the other part of the equation we haven't really touched on today. Energy efficiency for appliance, these are clear. But how about for the old buildings? Thank you.
Yeah, we have this question. Yeah. Old building retrofitting. And then question?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Louis Doucet. I work for the French Consulate General in Hong Kong. So thank you all for a very interesting discussion. I had written it on the QR code, and I realized my question was way too long. Anyway, I'll shorten it. The presentation by Mr. Gibson at the beginning showed that efforts to reduce emission need to be drastically accelerated to reach 2 degrees and ideally 1.5 degree. However, we do not see, I must say, except in the framework of this kind of event, climate change as a political priority for the Hong Kong government. If you look at the policy address last October, it was like a few paragraphs in a very long speech by the chief executive, or the recent decision to postpone the introduction of the solid waste scheme to August. So, we heard a lot this morning that supply and demand was critical, and this is true. But from our perspective, from a European perspective, demand also comes from the consumer side, and the consumer side means change in patterns of consumptions, change in building, where we use our buildings, as was just said. Food systems, transport, including air transport. And we hear a lot in Europe about the so-called sacrifices that we need to do to reach carbon neutrality. So my question is basically, what can the government do to make people understand that to reach carbon neutrality will require also this kind of sacrifices, and that sobriety, which is a key word in the debate about climate change in Europe, is a key part of efforts to reach carbon neutrality also in Hong Kong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert Gibson. How confident is the panel that the government will meet, or Hong Kong will meet, the target of reducing energy consumption in commercial buildings by 15 to 25% in absolute terms? This is not an intensity, this is absolute reduction by 2035. That's part of the Climate Action Plan. It's an ambitious target because we're going to have a lot more buildings. So perhaps 15 to 20% absolute means somewhere close to 40% in intensity. And at the moment, we've got 8 different policy measures which are in the plan for achieving this, but there's no attribution. How much of the reduction is from each of those policy measures? And we're also not terribly clear as to what it means by commercial buildings, because when EMSD reports it, I think they include WSD, water services, drainage services, highways in that number. So it would be great to have clarity, and I'd like to know if you're confident Hong Kong will achieve its target. Thank you.
Okay, I think the 2 questions on building retrofitting, especially for existing building retrofitting, in connection with, okay, now we have a target of reducing energy consumption for commercial as well as residential building. Robert, you asked question, confidence. I think Professor Alfred, you want to? I don't know. I don't want to CF.
I suppose you should invite CF to answer this.
Do you want to? Do you want to answer?
Anyway, well, I'm always quite optimistic about the future of Hong Kong, including our journey in combating climate change. Certainly, there is a lot of challenges ahead, but 2023 should be a bad year and also a good year. A bad year because we see and witnesses by ourselves the problem, the impact of climate change to the whole world, mainland China as well as Hong Kong. We still remember clearly the flooding of the Wang Dai Xin MTR station. The climate change is real. So it's a bad year. But it's also a good year because it pushed the people of Hong Kong, even the whole world. We need to face the climate change as the main threat to the whole mankind. It may be the year that we can consolidate our effort. Government only can lead and by example and pave the way. But we need the people to work together, to walk together for the same purpose in the journey. So I'm optimistic because I'm confident to the people of Hong Kong. So we understand very well that Hong Kong people should have the will to do something new. That's my thought. So I may not be able to answer because I'm not in the government. So, CF, do you like to supplement, please?
Yeah, it's better you ask CF than I ask.
Thank you, Robert. I think whether we are confident in meeting the target has a number of factors. The first one is whether the government is ready, the policy is ready. And the second one is whether the technology is ready. And thirdly, whether the market is ready. That means the peoples are ready. So in terms of government commitment, it's quite clear. I have repeatedly mentioned the government targets. So since 2021, we are ready, the government, in introducing new policy to make the target a true practitioner. In terms of technologies, we have to rely on, apart from government effort in promoting research and development, we need also to rely on the market and the research institutes to develop the kind of innovative technologies and to put them into local application. And for the third, we have been introducing measures like funding support and other schemes for the research institutes to try to put more effort, more focused effort on technologies, innovative technologies, which is conducive to the reduction of carbon in Hong Kong. And this is the important element of it. And the third one is even when the policies are ready and the technologies are ready, it's a matter of whether the public, the community are ready. I think personally, I share with Alfred that the community is mentally ready, but whether it's economic, whether it's ready or not. And this will also depends very much on the economies of the technologies. And over the years, we found, over the past few years, we saw a lot of innovative technologies which can contribute significantly to electricity consumption reduction and this kind of things. But still, these new technologies is relatively unaffordable to most of the people in the industry. So we still need a lot of effort to lower down the cost, to make it more cost effective, so that the first mover in the market can take trial of these technologies, and when the scale come into play, and it will become a cost-effective technologies we can bring down to the target. I think this is the situation we face in Hong Kong. And on Daniel's point, I think Daniel raised a point on that we have the policy intent to written in the legislation, but in the implementation of it, there are technical issues to be sorted out, like the interpretation of those kind of policies. I have no fixed answer for your question now, but I have committed to bring this to the policy team to make to try to get rid of it. I think we share that we need to view the problem from the first principle rather than the text of it. Thank you.
So we need to empower you, CF. If you want to,
Yeah, just a supplemental view on the discussion here and some of the bringing together some of the questions. I agree that consuming less is a really important part of getting there, as are interesting technologies like microgrids that allow the consumers to be a more active part of the system. Really important, but something to consider when thinking about the policy here. 90% of the electricity we produce is consumed in buildings. And we, as I've articulated earlier, have a clear plan for decarbonizing the supply of that electricity. So when considering where to allocate our resources, I think it's worth remembering that reducing our consumption, playing a more active role, deploying technologies that allow consumers to play a more active role is about reducing the costs and the burden. So there's less of the sobriety issue, right? It's more about how do we help people to live in that system. And it's more about that and less about decarbonization, I think. So when we're thinking about retrofitting existing buildings, how much of that do you actually want to do? It comes down to the cost and remembering that it's about reducing part of the reason we're doing that is to reduce the cost of decarbonizing.
Thank you. Mark, you want to add?
I think just to echo, very agree. We actually need to have a very affordable solution in order for the energy saving. So I give a very good example is actually we are doing the retro commissioning for EMS, the headquarters. And traditionally, we need to do based on engineering approach, which consume a lot of time and effort. But recently, we are developing together with VMSD on using the software to do it. So the software, if you do it on one time, you can quickly apply to other government buildings in a much lower cost. So this is what we're talking about, being affordable and scalable solution for building energy efficiency is very critical. We cannot rely on very traditional approach to replace the equipment using the laborers to do it, but we need to do it in a more scalable way. So I think this is something an option. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are running out of time. Pretty sure I think the last few questions we discussed about, of course, mentally we are ready, but in Hong Kong we also need to consider cost for energy transition, energy efficiency. So I can see, of course, the business will be, of course, I think ready, at least for those sitting here are ready, to support the government, to drive more innovation. And of course, we also want our grid to be further decarbonized, and we'll continue to work together on this. So please feel free to connect with the panelists after this. We have some 20-25 minutes break, networking break. And last but not least, please give me a round of applause to the panelists. Thank you.
Welcome back. Our second section today begins with another panel discussion. Paris Agreement, Article 2.1, Financial Mechanisms to Help Us Achieve the Transition. May I now invite our moderator, Mr. Lionel Mok, Sustainable Finance Program Lead of Civic Exchange, followed by our panelists, Professor Grace Ho, Adjunct Professor, HKUST Division of Environment and Sustainability, Ms. Teresa Lin, Advisor, Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub, Hong Kong Center, and Ms. Xin Lan, Director, Green and Sustainable Hub, Asia Pacific of Natixis. Mr. Mok, over to you, please.
Sure. Thank you. Hello. So thanks for those of you who have stayed. Extra points. This is great. And so this previous panel that we had was very focused on Hong Kong. And in the BEC, that makes a lot of sense. Talking about local businesses, local decarbonization, local energy systems, and so on. I think what wasn't discussed so much, but is also a very major feature of what we're trying to talk about, is Hong Kong's role as a financial center. And the title of this panel was Article 2.1c, and really looking at the way in which governments around the world are trying to think about redesigning financial systems in a manner that can support the types of infrastructure investments that we are talking about locally. And so I'm hoping in this panel, we can zoom out a little bit and go to more of a global scale, but keeping in mind a lot of the local challenges that we have and try to bridge that conversation. And to do that, I've invited 3 people from very different parts of the financial world to come together and share a bit of insight and experience from from the COP, and also to give us a forward-looking view on where Hong Kong can go next, and what are some things that we can start to look at, either from the regulatory or policy perspective, but also, as was mentioned earlier, the market, and how do we prepare the market, and also how prepared is the market. So, Grace, and I'm going to ask every one of you the same question, but by way of introduction, could you start by just telling me a little bit about how your organization supports the Paris Agreement objectives?
Thank you, Lionel, and thank you, BEC, for inviting me to share my views. In addition to being an adjunct professor at UST, I actually have a startup company that focuses on carbon asset development and carbon finance. I think it's important because we cannot get away from talking about carbon taxation at some point. I really think that it's time that we really think about how we're going to price in our carbon emissions. And so I'm hoping that by developing carbon projects that would help people to find a way to, first of all, using high quality carbon offsets to address their unabated emissions. And secondly, I would like to help get the capital markets money, which is like 400 trillion out there, to some of the really needed projects in research and development, for example, in green technology or carbon capture, usage and storage. And in addition, for example, shipping industries that Simon is very familiar with, we can also do CCUS, well, at least carbon capture on ships. And all these R&D, they need financing. And I don't think there's enough at all. So by helping people to understand the carbon financing, carbon projects, and the incentives that they can get from investing in these carbon projects, I think is important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for BC having me to join the panel discussion today. So I'm Shane, I'm from Natixis. So we're actually the corporate and investment banking of Group BPCE, which is the second largest banking group in France. So my team is called the Green and Sustainable Hub. I know other banks may name as Sustainable Banking Team or Sustainable Capital Market, but we see ourselves as a hub in the bank. So we have external mandate, which is to provide sustainable financing solution and advisory to our clients. But we also have our internal mandate, which we have, as a bank, we have our net zero commitment by 2050. So which means we need to work with our business partners within the bank to have the transition, which means we have our focused sectors. We actually established our internal tools called Green Weighting Factor. So to colorize each financing we are providing since 2018. So we see that it's an integrated approach from our portfolio management to enable the transition happening. So for the COP28, myself, I didn't be there, but I have the EMEA team colleagues as a delegate of Natixis being in COP28. So the result, as already mentioned by previous speakers, we see progress, but we also see that drastic actions needed. So we are stressful, but also very encouraged to see the key takeaways, as mentioned already, to triple the renewable energy investment by 2030, and also the move away from fossil fuel. And also, I want to highlight the acceleration asked to zero or low carbon technology. I think already mentioned by Mr. CF Wang, like a lot of technology, as also Grace pointed out, CCUS, hydrogen, and also other alternative we may name previously, and now we see that at least from banks' perspective, we are more keen to see the bankability of those projects, and that's also what we are working on right now. Yeah, so very looking forward to the later discussion.
Okay, thank you, Sing. And Teresa, I know that you are technically on loan from HKMA at BIS. I'm wondering if you could sort of explain what you're doing at BIS, but also sort of how you got there.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, BEC, for inviting me, and thanks, Lionel, and fellow panelists. So I'm Teresa from the BIS Innovation Hub, and as Lionel mentioned, I'm on loan from the HKMA to the BIS. So the BIS is the Bank for International Settlements, and I work in the Innovation Hub, which is the innovation arm of the BIS. So the BIS can be considered as the central banks of the central banks. It's owned by 63 central banks around the world, and the Innovation Hub was set up to look at how technology can apply to help central banks to do their mandates and also the functioning of the financial markets. There are a few themes within the BIS Innovation Hubs that we look at, and green finance is one of the themes, and I work mainly on the green finance stream. So as part of my work last year, I completed the Project Genesis 2.0. So as some of you may know, the HKMA launched the first tokenized green bond by a government in last year. And in February last year, and they issued a second issuance earlier this month. And the learnings from the Project Genesis, which we worked with the HKMA, formed the basis of the tokenized green bond issuance last year. And my project, Genesis 2.0, we added smart contract carbon credits, right? Yeah, onto the project as an objective measurement of how green the green bond is. So the idea was really to promise the investors that their use of proceeds will be put into a green project that generates carbon credits in a future date. But by putting it into the issuance present day, the project developers can gain the economic benefits at day one. So they use the proceeds to build the projects and then generate the carbon credits in the future date. And we attach blockchain to this project and also put IoT devices at the project site. And the idea of doing that is to create transparency for the green bond. So the IoT devices would capture the green data from the project sites and record it directly onto the blockchain and be viewed by the investors in real time. So that was what we did as one of the projects. And we also, the reason why I was at COP was I worked with the Central Bank of the UAE and the COP28 presidency on a tech sprint. And this tech sprint had 3 problem statements around AI, blockchain, and IoT, and sensors technologies. So we invited solutions around the world to propose solutions around these 3 technologies on how to scale sustainable finance and bridge the sustainable data gap. And we received a lot of really interesting solutions, more than 126 proposals from 31 countries. And we selected 15 finalists and 3 winners. And we had really experts on our judging panel, including Dr. Marjun. And it was a really great initiative because as central banks ourselves, we learned a lot from what the market is already offering. And we saw the benefits of such tech sprint is to showcase the existing technology and possibly the bankability of these technology. So this is kind of a nutshell of what I'm working on. And the next project is on AI and Scope 3 for SMEs and also transitioning for the supply chain. So I'll be happy to share more later.
Okay, that was a very steep ramp up into a lot of technical things very quickly, and we'll get to that in a second. But I think in terms of learnings from COP, it was very nice of you to share that, and thank you. I'd like also Grace, because I know you were there as well. What are some very key takeaways for you from COP?
From my perspective, I was there to speak at 2 events. By the way, thanks to Robert who warned me not to wear high heels because actually I was walking like 16,000 steps a day, which is like what I normally do in a month. Anyway, so I was there to speak at 2 events. Number one is towards the blue-green economy. I think in addition to green, we're starting to talk about blue. That's because in the last Belt and Road conference in Beijing, there were pledges about establishing financial institutions for blue investments. There were also pledges to support agriculture technologies, as well as to build marine scientific research partnerships. And the audience at COP were really trying to find out how we are going to finance a blue economy. Now, obviously, China is actually one of the largest blue bond issuers. When I say blue, it's actually kind of blue aligned bonds until last September when the International Capital Markets Association actually published a guidance on blue bonds. And so in addition to blue bonds, making sure that the money goes to the ocean projects, because of my startup, I naturally talked about blue carbon credits. It is actually very niche, but actually there has been success projects as well. For example, there's one in Pakistan, in Sindh, Pakistan. They were going to plant and restore 450,000 hectares of mangrove. And if some of you are familiar with biodiversity and numbers, actually mangroves sequester 4 times more than terrestrial forestry. So the project actually will basically translate to about $12 billion in carbon credits by 2075. And so I think we are moving towards, mangrove forestry. And then in Sumitomo Bank, Sumitomo Corporation in Japan, they're also working with the local communities in Indonesia, again, working with, on mangroves forestry projects. And they will be generating 600,000 blue carbon credits for trading by Sumitomo Corporation. So these are the things that we talked about how to finance the blue economy. So it's blue bonds, making sure that they're aligned to SGD Goal 14, and then we talk about the blue carbon credits. The other event I went to, we just talk about the just energy transition, and as you can imagine, the topic can be very wide from what you meant by just transition to the demand the industry companies put on the financial sectors in the context of energy transition, as well as what are the new financing instruments that we can create to help finance the just transition. So that's the discussions that we had. But in terms of the learnings, I actually, as Singh said, it was good that the COP28 was closed with the agreement to phase out fossil fuel, but there were no kind of advanced discussions in relation to how to address Article 6 to make sure that the global carbon market have standardized methodologies as well as standards. So that was a disappointment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grace. So I think I'm sort of sensing that there are two sort of pillars in this discussion. There's sort of this building of labels and classification systems, blue bonds, green bonds, and what does that constitute, and how do we make sure that or transition bonds are credible and ambitious enough. And that can sort of tie into the energy discussion that we had earlier. And I think the other topic, Teresa, that you've raised, which is also related to a conversation that happened earlier, is the ability of the market and businesses to use innovative technologies to either decarbonize themselves, but something that might be relevant to Yuxing is the reporting of that, right? Like actual measurement tools, instrumentation that can improve measurement. And we can, I think I'd like to pick on both of those conversations, but maybe we could go back to you, Teresa, and start. If you could expand a bit more on, I think what I find interesting is that BIS, you are a central bank of central banks, essentially, and yet you are developing tools that are going to be relevant for SMEs. So how do you sort of come to terms with that big gap, and how do you see that fitting into the ecosystem of the investment banks that are eventually under your purview through the central banks?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we got asked that question when we were getting the approval from the board of the approval. So you're right that our remit is the central banks as well as the financial markets, but there are increasing regulations for banks to understand their own risk management and their financed emissions. And Scope 3 makes up a lot of the finance emissions. So the OECD report found that SMEs actually contribute more than 50% of the GHG emissions in the business sector, but only 10% of these SMEs understand or even measure their carbon emissions. So if we want to help banks to understand their finance emissions, we need to find tools to help these SMEs to understand and also measure their own carbon footprint. That feeds into the Scope 3 of these big corporates who are the borrowers of these banks. So this is where the angle we're coming from, and applying technology in this space could be helping SMEs to have automated ways to measure their carbon footprints, or to use AI modeling technologies to estimate when there is a missing data.
And Grace, do you see that, how do you see that being picked up in the market? I think you have a lot more of a local perspective on things as well.
I think the SMEs is probably the most difficult to tackle in terms of getting emissions data out of them. And I know there are all sorts of organizations are working on a better calculator, because there is already a lot of different calculators to estimate or guesstimate the carbon emissions. But they're not very well used, right? I'm hoping that next week there will be some sort of announcements about the calculators for Hong Kong. I think for the SMEs, education is very important. They don't understand what they're doing. They don't have the resources. And so we've been talking about that for a number of years, but yet, there are not enough incentives to drive their wanting to report on emissions data. So I don't know whether any bankers out here. I know you are here. But are there any a much lower interest rates? Each bank should have a dedicated section to help the SMEs to green their transition. And to give them incentives to plug in the information on a white label platform. There are so many platforms out there again, there are a couple in Hong Kong as well, that attempt to help SMEs to report on their emissions, especially those listed on the exchange. But equally, they can be used by different types of businesses. But it's going to cost them something. So I think we need the banks to help that. And also, if their results are good, and you can even lower the interest rate to help them to finance the transition. So these are the things that I can think of from, I don't know about you, Sing.
So that's why I said we are stressful. Indeed, I think, I'm not sure if everyone is aware of the current market practice in terms of sustainable financing instrument. So basically, there are two pillars we are applying the label. So the first is user proceeds, which means there should be dedicated project that is categorized as green, or as Lionel mentioned, as a transition activity. So if the money will be 100% used for that, then they can get the label. And the second pillar is sustainability linked, which can be used for general corporate purpose, but that will require the company to have a very clear transition trajectory to different material KPIs. It can be carbon emissions, it can be energy efficiency, etc. So I would say for both pillars, we need data as a bank, because for the user proceeds, as mentioned, there are a lot of classification system or taxonomy out there. But I think that's important for us to have better visibility about the project's green credentials. So we want the criteria to have more threshold, to have more clear metrics, So all this we need data, and then for the other pillar, as mentioned, it's KPI requested and target should be predefined. So those are all data intensive, and that's one thing I want to add is that we see a lot of sustainability related regulatory updates. I think a lot of sustainability professionals have been fed up with the monthly or bi-weekly updates from different jurisdictions, from different organizations about the updates. But we think that's essential, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of we need to follow. But we see one important pillar of the system, in addition to taxonomy, is a disclosure. So we see that Hong Kong is definitely playing the leading role in the region. I mean, after the Paris Agreement signed, the stock exchange has the ESG disclosure requirements, which followed by Singapore. And then we see now a lot of emerging markets has adopted this, like in Indonesia. And also, as Chris may be aware, in Indonesia, as a very fossil fuel relied country, they launched the carbon trading platform very recently as well. So we see that disclosure is kind of the starting point for different countries trying to establish their small financial ecosystem. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, there's always a love-hate relationship between the market and the regulators. You definitely need them to regulate, but also not over-regulate, and there's a regulatory game that we have to think about all the time. And I guess, as someone who has experience with regulators, noting the challenges, the data challenges that have just been discussed, I was wondering what, maybe from global experiences, could Hong Kong be doing next, in the next year, in terms of building this data capacity? And I should maybe premise that question with pointing out that next week is essentially HKMA's Green Finance Week. And they're running that with the IFC, and there'll be a lot of events, definitely worth checking out if you haven't heard about this already, to build different parts of the ecosystem, whether that's on taxonomies or this is about SME data and reporting. And there'll be multiple sort of panels, definitely worth checking out. But Teresa, going to you, what are some more things that the regulators could be doing to sort of encourage data availability?
I'm not going to speak from the regulator's perspective, but just from international experience, I've seen jurisdictions where they have really good ecosystems, where the different stakeholders come together on a common platform where they can share different things. So data is one of it. And I think there's a lot of talk about there's a lack of data, but the fact is there are a lot of data out there, but whether the data is being shared by different parties, they're working in silos, they're not being shared in a digital format that can be analyzed. These are some things that I think the ecosystem can work on, and bringing people and businesses together where the businesses needs are met, I think it's also important, because there are fintech startups that I've come across. They have really good solutions, but the market doesn't know about them, or the regulators don't know about them. So how do we showcase these startups and match them with businesses that actually need these solutions, or fundings that can help these solutions fine-tune their solutions and bring them to a next level? So I think that's another thing that we can also explore. And digitizing data, I think it's super important. I know the HKMA has recently designed with CDP on a questionnaire for SMEs, but making that SME data open source, be it in a consent basis, and also digital form, I think it will be very helpful for the development of the whole ecosystem in Hong Kong. And yeah, enabling sharing of useful information, best practices, knowledges, I think it's key for innovation and partnership.
Okay. If anybody has any ideas, solutions, or pitches on data tools, definitely talk to Teresa after this. So maybe let me switch track back to that other conversation on transitions and labeling. And I think this is something, Ching, that we talked about before. and how difficult at this stage. It's a bit messy right now with different transition or financial labels that are out there, and the need for what I guess some people in the market are calling like a credible transition label. So, and because you're not just working in Hong Kong, I mean, Natixis, you're very global, and you have these really great policy reports that come out covering a lot of different jurisdictions. How are you seeing this sort of transition label mess being clarified? And do you have, I mean, with HKMA's Green Week coming up, what would you like to see in from more transition guidance? Like, how could the HKMA be useful when it comes to providing transition guidance to what you're doing?
Okay, so for the question, so for transition label, so let's step back, because when we say labeling, we normally now refer to International Capital Market Association's principles, sustainable finance related principles or loan related principles. But so far we learned, what we got updated from them is that the transition label principle won't be there in the near future, because we're actually coordinating the handbook of climate transition finance within ICMA. So they didn't put it as a standard, because I think we share the view that transition is a process. So now in the market, we see the existing user process pillar or the sustainability linked pillar can actually let the transition financing happen already. Because if we look at the recently issued transition bond from Japan, so they are using the user process. They have their own definition of transition activities. So I think we have discussed with some investors about their feedback on the transition bond, because it's labeling Japan's own jurisdiction. So we want to learn the European ESG investors' view. I think they are quite open-minded to this kind of instrument, but the key question, as I mentioned, is about the threshold of the transition activity defined. Because even when we talk about the green taxonomy, we spent years on the harmonization already. And for transition activity, as Leonard mentioned, it's complex. The complexity brings the concern of credibility. So I think what we want to bring in the climate transition finance book is that transparency is a key for the transition financing scale up. Yeah, because the investors or financiers as us, we want to see the borrower or issuers, they have clear sustainability strategy. They have their decarbonization pathway, which is science-based or scientifically sound. And the disclosure of their sustainability strategy and roadmap is key to us. So that's what we see. So for the, I know when you say labeling, you may think about the transition taxonomy, which is available in Singapore and developed in developing process in China and Hong Kong. So that's what I want to say is we were very excited to see the prototype of green classification system launched by HKMA last year. And I think it's quite comprehensive to our perspective, but what we even more welcomed is what specified as a next step for HKMA's taxonomy. They specified that they will have more like a technical screening criteria for transition activities, and also they will have more sector-focused or local context embedded in the classification system, which we think is quite important for Hong Kong. And for us, from the international perspective, so we do have our view on different sectors. As you may concern, it's like we need to transit our portfolio ourselves. So as we are part of Net Zero Banking Alliance, as mentioned, so we already have set our interim target to the sectors we are focused, like in oil and gas, in power generation, in steel, even in real estate. We have set our target. And we have the internal target, which means we need to facilitate our clients in their transition, because their scope 1 and 2 emissions are our scope 3 emissions, as Teresa pointed out. So that's one way, I say, trying to embed the sustainability linked structure for them. We will take that into consideration in different sectors.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's very helpful. And I definitely think that the Japanese transition bond is a very interesting case. And it sounds like you think that could be relevant for other markets as well, provided that we're able to justify the rate at which those goals are met and set, of course. And I think that goes back to what Ivo mentioned earlier about the phases within CLP, and how do we make sure that local companies, again, are able to communicate to the global market that they are developing transition plans that are credible. And I think that's a conversation that we have to continue having as a group here. I realize that we're starting to run out of time. There's a QR code. If anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in. But before I do, maybe some reflections on the last.
I think this event is also sponsored by Civic Exchange. They actually also did a very good paper last May, just a day or same day as the HKMA white paper on the taxation transition taxonomy. So there's actually, if you haven't seen it, just go and take a look at that paper. It's on the Civic Exchange website, and basically compares all the ASEAN and all the world's transition taxonomies, and you will learn something from there. Okay, so in reflection, I'm just going to be very bold, given that we don't have much time left. In terms of what are the latest international developments that people can learn, or governments can learn in Hong Kong. Really, I think there are a lot of industries that are really concerned about the first world's carbon border tax that EU launched in October last year. It is in a transition phase, but it's going to affect all the trading partners that import or export goods, into the EU, and they will look at how. It's called a CBAM, right? And CBAM is calculated based on the EUA, the European allowances prices. Now, for us in Hong Kong, it's about time we revisit seriously about adopting carbon taxation. We need to have a seat at the table to negotiate these carbon pricing. And in addition to EU, we know that Canada, the UK, the US are also going to impose similar carbon border tax. So if there are people importing goods into Hong Kong/China, we should think about how we're going to charge them. In addition, as we know that we need to do drastic events, right? So apart from the, Ivo is not here, right? He's gone. So apart from the utility companies, oh, you're here. Sorry, I haven't got my glasses on. Apart from the utility companies, we've got to start thinking, how are we going to impose carbon tax on our own companies, industries here. He has to deal with the Environmental Bureau, so I'm not going to go there. If you don't start really monitoring and paying for your emissions, there's not much is going to change. And so this is what I would like the government to revisit. Any government officials here left? The other thing is really about the disclosure. So I was at Exchange, and I was one of the people that forced the mandatory reporting of ESG data. But we need to move a step further, which is like Switzerland. They have just recently imposed mandatory reporting of ESG data by certain sizable companies. However, if they don't do it properly, i.e. there's false information in the data, is subject to criminal sanctions, okay? Obviously, it's directors of the company, as well as 100,000 Swiss francs a fine. So I think for Hong Kong companies, at the moment, there is no assurance. It doesn't really matter what you say because no one is going to challenge you, really. And so I think we need to really take a step further and start enforcing the false information in ESG reports.
That's quite a ambitious recommendation.
No one's going to like me after this.
But the government officials have left the room, so that's fine. Teresa, maybe I can go to you. And there's a question here actually about Project Genesis, and I think that sort of next stages and what your plans are for this coming year. And I think that kind of builds on Grace's point about building more data. So I guess could you just sum up by giving us a hint about what's happening next?
The Project Genesis is in the tokenized green bond with carbon credits or the AI for SME disclosure?
Well, the question doesn't specify.
Okay. All right. So for Project Genesis, because at the BIS Innovation Hub, there are projects where we build actual products as a proof of concepts, or we build products that try to inspire the markets to take things forward. So Project Genesis falls under the second category, where we try to inform the markets of what technologies are available out there and propose a new green bond structure and to try to inspire conversations around that. And we involve banks in our project. Goldman Sachs was part of it, and also a Thai bank was part of it. So we wanted to see how the market participants see this product and how they would price it, and if they see any business sense in it. If they do, they can bring it forward. But the BIS would not be involved in that. For the AI and SME disclosure, I'm in the launching stage, and I'll be launching that probably before Q1 this year. And I'm actually looking for financial institutional partners to look at the financing part of it, because one thing is to help the SMEs measure and disclose their data, but then the other thing is to matching the data with finance. So how do we help SMEs gain financing to transition into a cleaner mode of operation? So this is why we're also looking for a financing partner. So I'm welcome for a conversation.
Jing, are you interested?
We can discuss.
Great. Any questions from the floor? No? Sure, Robert?
One of the things which is not directly what you're talking about, but very related, is Just Energy Transition Partnership. So there's a 20 billion one that got signed with Indonesia and a 15.5, I think, with Vietnam. And the idea is these large sums of money will help these countries decarbonize their electricity supply. What role does Hong Kong have in this?
Yeah, I can simply comment that I would say a lot of financing to Indonesia are happening in Hong Kong. That's the first thing. Because as Ivo mentioned already, is the energy trilemma is very obvious in Indonesia. It's a country growing very fast, and the resources they have is also the enabler of the transition. But due to its heavily relied on fossil fuel, I think a lot of banks, they may have some policies to restrict their financing to Indonesia. So now I think a lot of banks are also have their own transition assessment to emerging market in Southeast Asia and specifically for Indonesia. So to let, not only the investment on power sector, but we see that investment goes to like steel sector or metal and mining sector, to let them have the capacity to have more renewable energy secured. It's like an integrated approach to enable just the transition. Yeah.
I would just comment that I suppose, Robert, it's a bit difficult for Hong Kong, given that we have CLP and Hong Kong Electric, and they have their own things to do with the scheme of control agreements, and to finance Hong Kong's just energy transitions. Really, is the government working with the two companies. But I think what the government can do is to look at the other sectors, like the transportation sector, look at our aviation, shipping, you know, and the you know, the buses that Civic Exchange loves, and also you know, the buildings. You know, what are the funds to help, you know, all these buildings to retrofit and decarbonize? So I think, you know, I think the government has raised green bonds, but it is not clear how much is that they're going to use in the shipping, ports, and the, you know, and the aviation, for example, to have electricity, you know, by the berth, you know, or at the airport, so that when they're taxing, they can use electricity instead of fuel. So, Robert, I think you wanted to say something in return.
Sorry. So, you know, I agree with that. That's about decarbonizing Hong Kong. The Just Energy Transition Partnerships I was referring to is about decarbonizing large developing countries. Indonesia and Vietnam are the two which have got them signed up. Now, in the past, Hong Kong's financial services sector has earned its living financing coal-fired power stations in Indonesia and elsewhere, and it would be great to see us continue, or Hong Kong continuing to earn a living from providing finance to these countries, but for finance for them to transition to towards net zero, which is what these partnerships are about. But do we have anything to do with these partnerships? Our government isn't involved in them, and I think that may make it more difficult for our banks to be involved in them.
So I think we're up against the time, so I'm going to cut it there. But I think what I gather from this conversation is that we need to both look within Hong Kong as a place where businesses can start to adopt technologies that allow them to report and bring that data up through the financial system, whether that's to their direct lenders or to those that, you know, lend off to them, central banks, and then above that. And the earlier we can harmonize those data systems, the better. At the same time, we also need to think about what we can do in the financial system globally, and look at this just transition mechanism that is available. And it's going to be about finding ways to communicate through taxonomies in different jurisdictions, whether that's in Hong Kong or in the ASEAN. We need to figure out ways to align those regulatory settings. I think I'll leave it there because we do have one set of final closing remarks that I'd like to give time to. But could I just get a very big hand for my speakers?
Thank you to our speakers and moderators for their inspiring ideas and discussion. Please be seated. Now, may I invite Mr. Mark Harper, Chair of Climate Change Business Forum Advisory Group of BEC, to deliver his closing remark. Mr. Harper, please.
Okay, so I'd like to start by thanking all of our amazing speakers and moderators in particular for the amazing work that they've done, and also to thank all of you for sparing your time to listen to the event today. I've been given the rather unenviable task of trying to summarize what is a rather complex event and a complex international negotiations. However, as I've only got 5 minutes and I'm keeping you from lunch, I'll try and actually focus on what I think the key message is that we should be taking away from this event. And for me, that comes from what was mentioned up at the front in relation to the first global stocktake. So what the stocktake made clear is that we are way off track. And the window for keeping global temperature rise at 1.5 degrees is closing rapidly. The stocktake also highlighted the extent of the challenge facing the world, that we must reduce global emissions by 42% by 2030. So what does that mean for us, the business community? Well, to me, the message is simple and quite clear. To paraphrase the lyrics from a famous song, we need a little less conversation and a hell of a lot more action. So we need to prepare our businesses and the communities that we operate in for the impacts of climate change already locked into the system. And more importantly, we need to aggressively cut our Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. We should be setting science-based targets, and I would recommend all of you that haven't to sign up to the BEC's Net Zero Charter. Government and financial institutions need to increase the finance available
and the incentives available to de-risk innovation and drive the low-carbon transition. It is clear that the cost of inaction to our bottom line, and more importantly, to the environment and communities where we operate, is incalculable. It's incumbent on all of us to act. We must act now, and we need to be better, cleaner, and greener, to quote Mr. Wong from earlier. Let's make this our legacy for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper. Before we come to a close, I would like to invite all of our speakers and moderators to proceed to the stage for a group photo. May I also invite BEC CEO, Mr. Simon Ng, to join us on the stage, please.